Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with an individual who is doing extraordinary work and has done extraordinary work for years and years and years, both for the State of Israel and the Jewish people as a whole. His name is Benjamin Anthony. He made Aliyah from Great Britain, was an Israeli soldier. He was in a number of the most central operations of the first part of the 21st century. He went on to found Our Soldiers Speak, which we're about to pick up that story in just a moment. And he is now the founding CEO of the MirYam Institute. And one of the things that I'm anxious for you to hear is why he created the MirYam Institute and what he's doing now. His name is Benjamin Anthony. I said it before, if you're a fan of JBS, you've seen him many times on JBS with me and hosting his own series, Israel Briefing. But it is always a great pleasure for me to sit with Benjamin on L'Chaim. Benjamin Anthony, thank you again for making time for me and for our JBS audience.
Thank you so much. It's a real privilege, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Benjamin, I just want to pick up the story where we ended last time. You were explaining to me how you created Our Soldiers Speak after you served in the IDF. You were telling us that, lo and behold, you sort of started this venture visiting your hometown in Leeds in Great Britain. You said as you began speaking, you realized how important your message was. What was it that gave you that understanding? It's interesting, when you were in Great Britain, you were told, this message is important for American Jewry to hear.
Yes.
But at some point in your travels, you understood how important it was for American Jewry to hear. What happened, Benjamin, that sort of gave you that understanding?
It was American Jews. It was the ethos with which American Jews greeted me, and I'll explain it very succinctly. In the United Kingdom, I'd spoken at some of the most prestigious synagogues in the world. They're not just prestigious in the UK, Mark, they're prestigious anywhere in the world. So St. John's Wood, or Marble Arch, or Hampstead Garden Suburbs. These are huge, huge synagogues. If you're a congregant there, you're on the up and up, without any question about it. Chief Rabbi Lord Sachs, for example, speaks from the pulpit at St. John's Wood, and when he's not there, I believe Diane Binstock speaks from the pulpit in St. John's Wood. So these are very prestigious congregations indeed. But at the end of those talks, Anglo Jewry would say, well done, very interesting. We agree with what you said, and thank you for bringing it to us, and good luck to you. When I would speak in America, American Jews would say to me, your story resonates with us. You need to keep going. And not only do you need to keep going, but we are going to help you to keep going. We're going to invest. We're going to donate a car. I can tell you about an incredible story that happened with Rabbi Schranz in one of the synagogues in Manhattan. That was just unbelievable, which is where I first got my first donation to the organization. But most importantly, American Jews were opening the doors to the most prestigious synagogues truly in the world. So in the space of a 3 or 4 week series, I went to Fifth Avenue Synagogue, Park East Synagogue, KJ, Park Avenue Synagogue. One after the other was opening its doors and its congregants to me. And then in the Kiddush, and this is something I wish the younger generation of Jews would understand and would take advantage of. What you have in the Kiddush of your average Manhattan synagogue, or frankly any synagogue, is, in my view, the largest concentration of exceptional individuals anywhere in the world with time on their hands just waiting to talk to you. who you'd never meet during the course of the week. But if you meet them in the Kiddush, especially after you've given a talk, those Jews will shake your hand and you'll be speaking to the dean of such and such university. And then you'll spin on your heel and you'll be speaking to a professor of a particular subject. And then you'll be spinning on your heel and you'll speak to a titan of industry and a partner in a law firm and an educator and a rabbi and whomever it's, and they've all got time and they all want to teach and they're all generous of spirit, at least they were with me. And so when I saw that they wanted to invest, I saw that this needed to be done. And one of the places that they turned me to was the university system in New Jersey, which was under the auspices of a fellow named Eli Allen, a Sephardic rabbi from the Syrian community who was doing outreach. And I started to speak in those campuses and I realized there was a problem. There was a real problem on the American campuses and I started to speak about that. And people denied that. People said, this is not England, there's no problem on the campuses, you're panicking about nothing. But there was a problem. I'd seen it in the UK and I saw it taking roots and branch on campuses in the United States of America. And I realized that there was a need for an organization to come about. And I spoke, if I can tell you how this really started, Mark, I spoke in a synagogue, Saturn Place Synagogue. It was under the auspices of Rabbi Schrantz, who was a conservative rabbi. He'd previously been at Sinai Temple in Los Angeles before David Wolpe took that pulpit. And he'd moved to this synagogue in Manhattan. There was a fellow who I'd met during my travels named Joseph Potasnik, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik. And Rabbi Potasnik had taken on the role of Zivi Mendelson. He was trying to get me around to as many synagogues as he could. And on July 4th weekend, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, to whom I'll forever be indebted, said to me, Benjamin, you're not going to need to speak this weekend because it's July 4th. There aren't that many people in town, and anyway, they want to speak about America, not Israel, this weekend. So take the weekend off. Got a phone call from Rabbi Schrantz, who Rabbi Potasnik had pushed to host me, and he asked me to come and speak in his synagogue. Now, this is an incredible story. At that time, a friend of mine from the army, I was the heavy gunner, he was my sharpshooter, named Yossi Kaminsky, was in town visiting in his post-army trip, and he and I were hanging around in Manhattan. And I thought, I will bring Yossi Kaminsky to see me give this talk in this synagogue, and he'll think this is just wonderful. And I turned up for Soked Zimra, for the opening benedictions of the morning service, very, very early. Rabbi Schrantz sat with me in the main sanctuary, which would normally hold several hundred people. It was completely empty. And he leaned over to me and he said, Benjamin, don't worry, because by the time you're on, after Adon Olam, this whole place is going to be full. Well, Adon Olam came and went, Mark, and I got called to the podium, and I'm not exaggerating, there were perhaps 7 or 8 people in the entire sanctuary.
Oh, no.
7 or 8, I'm no exaggeration. And one of them is Yossi Kaminsky. So I went from riding high to total ignominy. And I remembered again my father's words, who used to entertain and still does, in fact, and he said, you must always do for an audience of 1 as you would for an audience of 1,000. And so I stood up and I spoke as best I was able. And at the end of that, there was a dark, short of stature, but very much radiating gravitas individual from France, from the Jewish community in France, who'd become a very successful businessman in Manhattan. And he said, Benjamin, your words really resonate with me. I know there's anti-Semitism here. We know because we've seen the anti-Semitism in Europe and in France. I'm going to give you $10,000, start an organization. And I laughed. I actually laughed because I wasn't fundraising. And I was very dismissive of it. And Rabbi Schrantz came up to me and said, did he say to you, he's going to give you $10,000? And I said, yes, that's correct. He said, if that man said it to you, it'll be there. And that individual was a gentleman named Rene Pierre Azria, and he became the chairman of the board of Our Soldiers Speak. And we really were, coupled with the kindness of Sim Herring and the kindness of the Stones, I was on my way to getting an organization, but it still wasn't there. And then I met Rosita Panini. And Rosita is an Israeli by birth. She's actually Persian by birth. She lived in Israel. After the army, she moved to the United States of America. And she was on a women's trip to the States of Israel, and in Jerusalem, I spoke about my time in the army for about 3 or 4 minutes, and she said, will you come and speak in New York? And I said, I actually do already come and speak in New York. Why don't you come to an event? Renee Pierre Azria had arranged a fundraising event in the home of somebody named Stanley Bergman, who is a very well-known philanthropist in the United States of America. And he and his wife, Dr. MirYam Bergman, were hosting a fundraiser for me. And I said to Rosita, why don't you come to that? I'm allowed 30 people there, but I'd love to have you come and join it. And Rosita said, okay, I'm going to come to that, but I'm going to bring my husband, my daughter, my niece, my brother-in-law, and my sister, and I'm going to come and watch that and listen to that and try and get you moving. And I told my assistant at the time, who was my sister, get rid of Rosita Panini. Get rid of this individual. She's not to come to this event. She can come to another event that I'm doing in New York, but there's a limit, a head count limit, and she's going to completely take over and block me from bringing other supporters in. Well, I didn't know Rosita at the time, but I do now. Nobody gets rid of this lady, Rosita Panini. She turned up, and she did bring her husband and her brother-in-law and her sister and her niece and her daughter. And at the end of it, she asked me to meet her in her office. And she was a real powerhouse. She was a real powerhouse in the fashion industry. She ran a hugely successful fashion company. And she brought me into her office and she said to me, where are you living? I told her I don't have anywhere that I'm living. Most of the time I'm in a car. And she said to me, how much are you earning? I said, I don't earn anything. I've been doing this for a considerable length of time without any earnings whatsoever. I loved what I was doing and I believed in it. And she said, we're going to get you an organization and we're going to turn this into an organization, and I'm going to wrap a business, if you like, infrastructure around this initiative. And she did it. And she stayed with us and really drove the organization forward. And anyone who's met her knows and understands how she's capable uniquely of doing that to what Our Soldiers Speak ultimately became. So anything that Our Soldiers Speak has achieved, it's been done and achieved hand in hand with this lady, Rosita Panini, who's now the co-founder and the COO of the MirYam Institute.
Wow, 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 what a story. But you understand, as you describe how you go from situation to situation, and it seems like it's just luck is following you wherever you go. And there is some mazel there and some beshert there, but it is really a tribute to you. It is because of who you are and the way you convey the message, both in terms of the presence. You have an extraordinary presence. You make us love being Jewish. We love the state of Israel. And the message that you give is very, very both important and well articulated. So that as you describe all of these serendipity moments, they're all because of who you are and because what you stand for and what passion you had. And, you know, driving around in your Pontiac without a home, without an organization, you weren't on anybody's payroll. And good for Rosita. And of course, I know her very well through you. She is a spectacular person. And the two of you have created something in a marvelous Jewish partnership. And your story resonates especially with me because of my, trying to build this quixotic notion of a Jewish PBS-style Jewish channel all over America. And I wish it were all over the world. I want it one day to be in Israel. And it's just grinding. And then every now and then, you meet somebody and they say to you, what you're doing is so wonderful, so spectacular, and they're in a position to help you, and they say they are going to help you. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. And so we're almost at the MirYam Institute.
Yes.
Okay. I was so curious to hear the experience you've had in American synagogues.
Mm-hmm.
Much of American Jewry is understood to be on the political left, especially within the Reform movement and the Reconstructionist movement, and that has the largest of all constituencies. And I want to know whether, number one, I want to know from you, how do you self-define yourself, Benjamin, in terms of the political spectrum of America? Benjamin, how do you self-define yourself?
In terms of how I self-define myself, I am to the right of center on security issues when it comes to the state of Israel, and to the left of center on social issues. And I am religious but not observant, which may sound like an oxymoron.
It is not.
Thought about that a great deal, but I'm very, very informed by my religious upbringing, but I'm not an observant Jew.
I understand completely.
Mm-hmm.
So now tell me, were you also received well in Reform congregations, or are you really telling us about how the conservative and Orthodox movements responded to you?
No, I was received very, very well in Reform congregations as well. Absolutely, I was. And in fact, I don't believe when you speak to the congregants about the IDF, not politics, and I wasn't speaking about politics, I was speaking about my experiences in the field within the state of Israel as we served in the defense of that country, or frankly beyond our borders in some of the operations in which I served. I feel that the denominations are not nearly as divided as people believe them to be. I think that people are still able, by and large, to coalesce around the Israel Defense Forces, around its mission statement. Politics is perhaps a conversation for another time between the denominations, but my concern was and remains that I'm not sure that the channels of communication between the various denominations are utilized often enough, run deep enough, or are experimented with sufficient regularity. But in terms of where I was speaking and what was moving me forward, I was speaking in Reform synagogues, Orthodox synagogues, conservative synagogues regularly and often, but I was not speaking on political issues. It's very important that this is understood. I was speaking about my experience in the field of battle as a soldier in the Israel Defense Forces.
Okay, I got it. So I'm thinking to myself, what if Benjamin Anthony was a great singer, or he played the guitar? Because I've had people on, whether it's David Broza or it's Ron Eli Ron, and I will say to them, would you do a song for me? And they've been kind enough to do a song. So this is not fair to you, but it's sort of similar, and why should I be fair? So, Benjamin, at one point, you were ready to speak for about 25, 30 minutes, and the rabbi said to you, you got 3 minutes, and you said you weren't ready. Then you said, over time, you have gotten yourself to the point where you have also got a version of what you say that's 2 to 3 minutes. So Benjamin, I want you now. We talk message. I want you to take 2 or 3 minutes, and I promise when this is done, we go to MirYam Institute. I want 2 or 3 minutes from you where you, just as if you were, I invited you to my synagogue, and now I said to you, here it is, Benjamin Anthony. Unfortunately, you've only got 2 to 3 minutes. What do you say to American Jewry, and by the way, non-Jewish communities as well? What is your message in 2 or 3 minutes?
So my message in 2 or 3 minutes is that when I first went to the Lebanon War, I was the only member of my family serving in combat. By 2012, I'd been joined in Operation Pillar of Defense in the unit adjacent to my own by my younger brother, Raphael. And in 2014, I was drafted to Operation Protective Edge. Raphael was drafted to Operation Protective Edge. And I literally drove my youngest brother, Alexander, to the gates of war to drop him off at his unit, he being mobilized by way of the emergency mobilization of reservists. And when Alexander got out of the car and we embraced, I started to give him advice on when to hold the rifle and when to cast it at the side and instead draw the knife, and told him that there were kidnapping units in the Gaza Strip seeking to kidnap one soldier, and tanks constitute a particularly rich target for kidnapping units of Hamas. And my younger brother turned on his heel and he walked to his unit and he joined that unit. And I am telling you that his stride had never, ever been quite so certain. And I thought about that stride because he was another individual who knew he was exactly in the right place at exactly the right time, for exactly the right reason, doing precisely the right thing, which was defending the one and only Jewish state. My mother was in the United Kingdom, in a distant land, looking at a war in a land close to her heart, but physically distant from her, in which she now had 3 sons. And when you have a situation like that, you have to ask yourself, what are you actually fighting for? Right? You have to ask yourself, what are you actually fighting for, and are you willing to die for that cause? So of course you hope to live long and peacefully for it. And I want anybody who cares about this subject to know that in the final analysis, we're not fighting for Israel because she's the only functioning democracy in the Middle East. I'm very proud of that fact. But if it was for democracies that we fought, Mark, every member of American Jewry would be a veteran of the United States Armed Forces. We're not fighting for the state of Israel because she's on the forefront of technological advent and innovation. If other people want to go and fight for microchips, they can have at it, but don't ask me to do that. I remind people that our forebears were yearning towards the state of Israel when it was a series of swamps and of deserts riddled with malaria and with disease, and still we yearn towards that land alone. I will also remind people that we yearn towards that land when it was most likely not to become a democracy, but in fact more than likely to become a socialist entity. Ultimately it did become a democracy, but it was by no means assured. So it's not for democracy, and it's not for technology, and it's also not because of the horrors of the Holocaust. Israel is a bulwark against another Holocaust. But our people were yearning towards that land before we'd ever heard the name Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen or Treblinka. And our future mustn't be predicated upon the horrendous past of another people. In the final analysis, I would say to anybody who cares for that country, that as is evinced and proven by every single chumash, on every single bookshelf, in every single synagogue, of every single denomination, in every city, town, country, continent where there is a synagogue, whichever language the Jewish prayers are translated into, whether the holder of the Chumash or Siddur has got the good sense to hold it the right way around or back to front or upside down, and I've seen it all in my travels. Mark, that tiny strip of land over there in the Middle East, with all of her challenges, but much more importantly, with all of her opportunities, just happens to be the homeland of the Jewish people, sworn unto our forefathers by God, and that's actually it. And that's actually all. And I would say to everybody, that is why our people went there. And that's why they never went to Uganda. It's the home of the Jewish people. It's from Israel, Mark, that our people stems. And it's about Israel that our collective futures are inextricably tied. And if Israel, the country, does well, I can tell you that Israel, the people, will do well, wherever they may be, including in the great United States of America. And therefore we must defend that land. We must do it proudly, unabashedly, and zealously. Because if we fritter it away, or we surrender to the pressures and the odds, once that land is gone, it's gone. And we won't get it back. And I don't think any of us wants to know a contemporary Jewish existence absent a strong, vibrant Jewish state. That's what this is about. And that's why I'm always willing and was willing during the course of my service to give all that I am and all that I have, whatever that may or may not be, in the defense of the one and only Jewish state. It's worth the fight. And I feel very proud to have been engaged in that. But of course, I hope now to know days and years, and indeed the remainder of my life, living at peace within the state of Israel.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's just beautiful. All right. At one point recently, you have morphed, and people should understand it's not you jettisoned, but you morphed Our Soldiers Speak into something you call the MirYam Institute. But wait, first of all, tell our viewers, why MirYam? Explain the name MirYam Institute.
Okay, so a quick word about Our Soldiers Speak and what we were morphing, so people will understand it, because thus far I've spoken about Pontiacs and sleeping in Pontiacs and so on and so forth. Well, in the intervening years, Rosita and our board, which incidentally is comprised of people from the left, center, and right, Orthodox and Reform, observant and not, they've really helped to move our organization forward. And I just want to take a moment to thank our board for everything that they do. They know who they are, and I will forever be indebted to them for their good counsel and guidance and generosity. With regard to what we were doing before we morphed, our organization was the only organization since the founding of the State of Israel through which the IDF would send the best of its officers, uniformed and active, to the elite graduate schools throughout the English-speaking world. And we'd reached more than 450 campuses through that vehicle. Now, we were not an advocacy group. We were dealing in education and policy and professionalism. And we were specializing in bringing Israel's unique experience to a global dynamic. So an example of that, we would send a member of the Military Advocate General's Corps to Harvard Law School to talk about the law of armed conflict. What happens under the law and in the eyes of the law when a standing military faces non-state actors? America is engaged in that dynamic, France is, Germany is, the UK is. But Israel, because it's the only democratic state engaged in that 45 minutes away from her capital city, is actually the laboratory of thought on what's called LOAC, the law of armed conflict, LOAC. And so we would send the experts to the top law schools. We would also send Israel's medical officials. We had the Surgeon General, and prior to him becoming the Surgeon General, one who was the Deputy Surgeon General, Tarif Badr, a member of the Druze community, on 2 tours going to the top medical schools, rather, to speak about our humanitarian work in Haiti and Nepal, and also on the Syrian border, dealing with refugees injured and wounded in the Syrian civil war. And we would go and speak in these universities to the pro, the anti, the undecided alike. We would then bring the best of those students who are minded for public office to the State of Israel for a 10-day law and policy tour. We bring them from about 15 different countries every year. All of them have an exceptional academic background. The vast majority are not of the Jewish faith, and they are minded for public service in the future. And indeed, some of them are already plying their political careers now, as having launched that in 2016. And then we would action them on the campuses. They would recruit for us, they would organize events for us, they would host us. The vast majority of these were not Jewish students, as I said, but they are all exceptional. And together with that, we briefed members of the United States Congress, members of the United States Senate, we briefed the administration on several occasions, and we also briefed legislative and policy staffers on Capitol Hill. So it's very, very substantive. And in addition to that, we brief communities. So that was the work that we were doing.
Okay, and I do want you to spend one more moment.
Please.
You described how it starts with a guy in a Pontiac.
Yes.
And now you described how it becomes a major force on college campuses. And as I said in my introduction, it also becomes something that administrations, that governments look to.
Oh, yes, very much so.
How are you able to develop the credibility that would allow you the kind of access your group had and the kind of people you had, not only to get to the college campus, in and of itself, that's interesting, but to be briefing members of Congress of the United States or other, parliaments throughout the world. That doesn't happen unless there's a credibility and a reputation that in some way I would imagine would take years and years and years and years to develop. And, we sort of ended the story where Rosita comes into your life and says, I'm going to help you build this into something substantive, and you don't have to live in your Pontiac from now on. And then all of a sudden, here Our Soldiers Speak is doing now. Our Soldiers Speak is meeting with members of Congress on Capitol Hill. Can you put your finger on what was the transitional moment, and what took you from a legitimate Israel advocacy role to basically being one that was helping people involved in foreign policy decisions make those decisions? How'd that happen?
Yeah. So there are two aspects to that. There are a lot of lone soldiers or soldiers who served in the IDF who want to go and do what it is that I did, or who want to go and do something else for a greater cause, whatever that may be, and it's all virtuous. The difficulty that they have, and I tell them this whenever they come and ask me how it's done, is that they're in it alone. And I can tell you that I literally say to them, you have to find your Rosita. That's the phrase. Now, Rosita can be a guy, it can be a girl, it can be somebody older, it can be somebody younger, it can be somebody of means, but you have to have what I would term a running partner. You have to have somebody who is going to bring to the table the inspiration, the drive, the know-how, and the experience that you don't have as you start out in your career. So I want to give you an example of that. Remember that I said to you, Rosita called me into her office. Well, she said to me, where do you work? Among her questions was, where do you work? When you're in the United States, where are you working? I said, I work from the car. And she said, from now on, you sit at this table, I will put a computer there, and you can work there whenever you're in New York. Now, I did work there, and back then, Mark, every email came to me, every phone call came to me. It was my phone number on the business card, it was my direct email. We were starting out. But what I got to hear was this CEO in business negotiate, operate, adjust, capitalize, retreat. And really, I got to listen to the way that she practiced her business. And I learned a tremendous amount from that has actually mentored me and served me very, very well. So you need somebody like that with you if you're going to do something like this, because you need a mentor, you need the experience, and you need the savvy that when you start out, at least in my case, I didn't necessarily have, and I was very fortunate to learn not exclusively from Rosita, but in largest form from that individual. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing you have to have. The second thing is, and I could talk about this forever, and I'd actually like to go off on a tangent right now. I know that the United States of America is taking a bit of a proverbial kicking at the moment. This country has been so generous to me personally. Americans have been so benevolent and charitable and philanthropic and giving of themselves to me personally, that I will never actually be able to thank America in the order that I would like to be able to thank her. This is the greatest country on earth, and I want to see it surge back to greatness and to security and to safety and to prominence and to leadership, because the world needs America in that form. And I absolutely refuse to pile on while everybody is observing, putting the boot in against the great United States of America. It has its flaws, it has its difficulties. You show me the country that doesn't have those. It's the greatest country on earth, and I have a far greater affinity for the United States of America than I do for Great Britain, which was not kind to me, which was not kind to the Jewish people, which was not kind to my family, which is not kind to the Jewish state. And I love this place. And Israel is my home. Israel is the greatest place for the Jewish people. But make no mistake about it, the United States of America means something. And the reason that I say that to you is that only in America can an individual turn up, have a disastrous event in Lincoln Square Synagogue, bounce back, be housed by a Jewish family, live in a Pontiac Firebird, and within a few short years, with the help of American Jews, and nobody is as philanthropic as American Jewry, nobody, can be sitting in the United States Congress, in the National Security compound, in the White House compound, advising the administration. And the reason that that happened was Rosita brokered and suggested that we arrange a partnership with the Israel Defense Forces. If you want to go to the best place, and I say this to anyone who's younger, who's starting out, who wants to start something, a business or an endeavor that they love and they can be passionate about daily, if you want to do that and you want to succeed, you have to bring either a person or a product or a concept with you that is going to make people want to sit down and hear what you have to say. And so we were bringing generals in uniform. We were bringing the commanders of the Northern Formation. We were bringing the Surgeon General to speak at the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Okay, and how did you get that level of people to come?
I was able, well, that's an amazing story. So we went in, we spoke with the Israel Defense Forces, we get this partnership done because we had a very strong, proud track record of campuses already in communities. I mentioned some of the synagogues, some of the campuses. I don't know how familiar everybody is with those venues, but you know, Mark, when I say I held the podium at KJ in front of the full complement of the congregation for a Shabbat, most people go a lifetime without that, right? And so, and that wasn't the only one. And so when you go to these synagogues, you build a track record, you build contacts, and I had been going to these campuses, and the IDF said to me, we've got a general, and we want you to take him. Can you meet him now? Now, this is an incredible story, because when you're in service in the IDF, you don't speak to a general, right? You wear your uniform and you do what the general tells you. And if you're lucky, he'll notice that you performed well, but you don't engage with a general. And so even though I'd been out of conscripted service for a while, a general is still a general. And I said, sure, I'll go. And Rosita said, sure, we'll go. And we go up to what's called the Kiryah, which is the IDF headquarters. It's a very tall building in downtown Tel Aviv, in central Tel Aviv. Some people will be familiar with it. And in there, at certain points in their careers, sit the generals of the Israel Defense Forces, including the Chief of Staff. That's the building where Benjamin Netanyahu will brief the General Staff, for example, and the Minister of Defense will sit when he's briefing the General Staff. And we go up this elevator, and we walk into this office, and there's a general there, 6'5", with hands 3-4 times the size of my own, shaven of skull, and his name is Major General Noam Tibon. And he is responsible for the service of 100,000 troops on the Israel-Lebanon border. So this is not just a general, this is a general among generals. And he's also America savvy, because he's a graduate of the Wexner Foundation's year at the Harvard Kennedy School, and he had spent time in Quantico with the United States Marines during the course of his service. So this is somebody who's very worldly on the subject of the United States of America. And he opens the door, and he's sitting there in full uniform, and he sits down, very softly spoken, but tremendous presence, and Rosita and I are sitting at a table opposite him. She's obviously completely undaunted by this. I'm absolutely daunted by this, because I'm looking at this general. And he said, so you want to take me to the United States of America? And I said, yes, of course, we'd very much like to do that. And he says, well, where would you like to take me? So I said, General Tibon, where would you like to go? And I remember his exact phrase. He said, I want to meet the leadership. So I said, what does that mean? Does that mean campuses? Does that mean high schools? I can get to those. What do you mean by leadership? He said, yeah, high schools are fine. Campuses are also fine. But I want legislators. Can you do that? I had never, ever spoken on Capitol Hill once to that point. And so I said, absolutely, of course, I do that all the time. And I will be more than happy to arrange that, General Thibon. And so I went back to the United States, whenever it was, some weeks thereafter. He agrees to come out with us. But I think he actually knew that I hadn't done it. But he wanted to see what I could do if he extended that challenge to me. I think he actually was aware of the fact that I was bluffing. And I did something that, again, can only happen in America. I started to telephone representatives in the United States House of Representatives, in the Senate. I started to work with other organizations that might be around. And sure enough, when he came to the United States of America, he had an all-star tour that took him to New York and Washington, D.C., and he absolutely did speak to the right representatives. That's how it started. That's what I mean when I say you bring either a person or a product or a concept, right? Now, his lecture was about Iran. Iran was the issue of the day. And if you are the commander of the Northern Formation, you are by definition dealing with Hezbollah. In fact, General Thibon is the author of the handbook as to how Israel will deal with Hezbollah during the next round of conflagration. And he happened to be bringing the right message with all of the stature and gravitas that he brought naturally, without politics, to elected representatives of the United States from both sides of the aisle. And that is how that started. And because General Thibon gave us the opportunity, we then built on that, and built on that, and built on that. And we really did bring a who's who of the senior ranks of the Israel Defense Forces. But I want to emphasize this, Mark. Only in America can an individual pick up the phone, get through to the relevant parties in the office of the elected officials, and receive audience. And not audience for 5 or 10 minutes, and not lobbying. We weren't lobbying, we still don't lobby. I'm not frankly interested in lobbying. It was an educational briefing at the behest of the elected representative. That is America. That's what America is, and that's how we managed to do it, and that's where we got our start. And we've just built on that and built on that and pushed ourselves to do more time and time again, and refused to stay stagnant and refused ever to wallow in the achievements thus far, but to look at these achievements and say, that was then, now what needs to be done now? Let's go and do that.
Okay. And that transitions us to the MirYam Institute. Talk about the MirYam Institute.
We've built upon that which we established through our Soldiers Speak. So we're going to the Harvard laws and the Columbia laws and the University of Chicago laws and the Princetons and the Yales and you name it, we were there, in the Georgetowns and Capitol Hill, and all of that is happening through this vehicle, Our Soldiers Speak. But we noticed two things. The first thing was, three things. The first thing was I was aging out of my military service. And with the passage of time, I felt more and more removed from the battlefield. And I don't want to live in the past. I don't want to lecture about something that I did in 2006. Day in and day out. It still feels like yesterday, but I can tell you, Mark, I'm not that same person, nor should I be that same person. A person who's trapped in events and in experiences that belong to 2006 all the way in 2020 is an individual whose development is stunted. And I have no intention of living a life that is the result of stunted development. I want to continue to stretch, and I want to do that as best I'm able for the cause of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. So I was aging out, and I wanted to make sure that I had a vehicle whereby I could still continue in this sector where I feel so privileged to undertake this work with full passion, without hearkening back and looking forward. And so I needed something that worked and that accommodated that, and that was this institute. That's point one. And the reason that was so important, Mark, above and beyond all else, is you have to be authentic with the people who are being gracious enough to give you of their time. If someone's giving you of their time, you damn well better say something, and you damn well better be candid, and they don't have to agree with you.
Absolutely.
And I've noticed you do this. I have seen you push speaker after speaker after speaker. I've seen you do it masterfully. I try to emulate it, not successfully, when I interview people for our work. I've watched you do that. I'm amazed that you do it. And I know that your viewers appreciate it. So if somebody is giving you of their time, you damn well better say something, and it should be candid, and they don't have to agree, but put something for them to consider, right? Credit them with the intelligence to make their own assessment. So I wanted the ability to be authentic. That's the first thing. That's why I needed that change as I aged out of the military. The second thing was that however much we got to these top universities and however much we got to these policy staffers, for everyone who was in the room, it occurred to us that there's a whole other segment that will never come into any event that has the word soldiers in it. Never. It could be American soldiers speak. It could be British soldiers speak. It could be French soldiers speak. Don't know who would want to go to that one, but it could be. And they're not going to walk into any such thing. Why? Because the issue of the military is either appealing to some and repellent to others, or it can be quite a divisive issue, right? It's not like the state of Israel where everyone goes through that system. We don't want to lose those people. And so what we wanted was a vehicle that, first of all, demilitarized the subject of Israel right off the bat. So we didn't want to make a subtle change. We wanted a dramatic change. We wanted a woman's name because that helps with the softening of the image. We wanted a name that is Middle Eastern and not exclusively Jewish. Miriam is that, in case we ever want to broaden our remit beyond just the issue of the state of Israel and go into the broader Middle East and the region. And we also wanted a name that spoke to the readiness of the Jewish people to undertake and to make even the toughest of decisions in order to safeguard the Jewish future. And Miriam is that person. Miriam is somebody who looked on as Moshe was placed on the Nile. Miriam is the individual who ran forth and sought a wet nurse for the Jewish baby when he was drawn out from the Nile by Pharaoh's daughter. Miriam has an illustrious history of heroism within the Jewish people. She is the embodiment of all of those things that we were seeking to bring about. So we went with the name the MirYam Institute. Now, the other thing was the third aspect. Remember, I said there were 3 points to this, was that I saw that there was a very real threat emerging. Not from the BDS movement, not from the Students for Justice in Palestine, from among our own Jewish number. And I want to make everybody aware of this, and I want people to pay attention to what I'm saying on this point. The Jewish people have known what it is to be expelled from their homeland. And the Jewish people have also known what it is to be expelled, ostracized, banished, and burned in lands where they sought to build a home. But I firmly believe that the era we are walking into and have already entered is that which is going to show the Jewish people what happens when strands, just strands, of the diaspora Jewish community affix a target for destruction upon the back of the one and only Jewish state. And that is a very real, present and clear danger. And it needs to be tackled. And it needs to be tackled with vigor and with rigor, but not with platitudes and dogma and statements, but with robust discussion and debate and dialogue and discourse. We need to bring about a platform whereby Israel's future is in Israel's hands, and we can bring you the voices of the far left in Israel, and we do, and I'm very proud to do that. And we can bring you the voices of the far right of Israel and everything in the middle, as long as it's within the mainstream. And you can agree with them or disagree with them. You can debate with them, or you can accept what they have to say. But the hand that is on the reins of the Jewish future and destiny, when it comes to the state of Israel, must be the hand of the citizens of the State of Israel, because they are the ones who will have to live with the outcomes of the policies that they espouse and that they implement. And I needed, and Rosita was of the same mind, and our board was of the same mind, we needed to bring about a platform whereby we could not only put Israel's internal conversation and make it more outward facing and have the debates and have the discussions. And you chaired our first debate. You chaired our first debate about the two-state solution brilliantly. We needed that platform, but we also needed a platform where wherever you are politically and wherever you are physically, you can engage with Israel through the MirYam Institute. So if you want to read an opinion piece that's published, you can do that on our site. If you want to write for us, we welcome your submissions. If you want to watch a video or screen a video, you can do that. And if you want to listen to a podcast while you're walking your dog or doing whatever it is that you do, you can do all of that through the MirYam Institute. What is our cutoff? If you want to debate whether or not the State of Israel has the right to exist, we will not grant you a platform. But anything else is fair game. And that is what we have brought about, and that's what we're doing. And that brings a wider audience. That brings a greater and broader range of participants on the campuses and in the communities. And we're just getting started. And it's counterintuitive, Mark. I want this to be a very clear point, because you're seeing, and we're living through these days, not just on the subject of Israel, on many, many subjects. The right is going more to the right and taking donors and voters with them. And the left is going more to the left and they're taking voters and donors with them. And you can do well by being partisan. You can do well by being a firebrand for your cause. But there's actually a place in the middle. And because we've been dealing with the IDF, which was non-political by nature, our constituency, despite my own leanings to the right, is actually very varied. It's very varied. It has many, many educated, sophisticated thinkers on these issues, and it's to that we continue to cater.
I understand so well. By the way, are there any other things the MirYam Institute is doing which is open to the public, which people should know about and might be drawn to?
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, physical events currently, and thank you so much for the question, Mark. Physical events are not taking place due to the outcome of COVID-19 and so on and so forth, but we're hopeful that the world will come to rights in short order. In lieu of that, we're actually going to be bringing about online debates, and we will be doing in-person debates. They are free, they are open to the public, and people get to hear from thought leaders and policymakers and individuals who've implemented policy from the left, center, and right on hot button issues. So the first debate, and it's specifically for communities. Remember I said we have this challenge to reach out to a diverse community. Well, how do you bring, because you can't get a left-leaning diaspora Jew to listen to a right-leaning Israeli. And you can't get a right-leaning diaspora Jew to listen to a left-leaning Israeli without the right-leaning Jew calling the left-leaning Israeli a traitor, and without the left-leaning Jew calling the right-wing Israeli a fanatic. And of course, it's not true. Your program has so many exhibits in evidence of that. It's just countless. And we're doing something similar at the MirYam Institute. So how do you get these two poles to come together as one? Give them someone to support, right? Give them a champion and a hero for their argument, and let them go at it with robust opposition. You see, I'm to the right of centre, Mark, but as much as I'm opposed to giving away land and dividing Jerusalem, and I would never ever support those policies, I'm just as dedicated to the notion that one's ideas should be challenged. And they shouldn't be challenged by an inferior adversary or protagonist or interlocutor. They should be challenged by an equal or a superior. And your argument should rise and fall on their merit, not based on the idea that you're speaking in an echo chamber. Let the audience make their decision based on what they're presented with, and bring the best of either side to it. So that's why we have the debates, so people can go online, they can see our debates, we're going to be publishing them, and they can do all of that at the miryaminstitute.org. MirYam is spelled with a Y, it's M-I-R-Y MirYam, the MirYaminstitute.org. Go to the events page, go to the multimedia page. You can see our events in the past, and you can receive updates about what we're doing in the near future. And if you sign up to our newsletter, obviously you will receive those updates.
I should say to our audience that Benjamin Anthony has been kind enough to offer to partner with JBS. And while I want you to know about all the events that you might want to go to through his website, his webinars, his debates, I am so pleased that what you're doing is going to be seen in part on JBS. And I just wanted our viewers to understand the many facets to what the MirYam Institute is doing through a website, through webinars, through live meetings. I'll say one more thing, and then I do want you to comment. One of the things that's missing in the Jewish world, it's missing in America, it's missing on American television, is debate.
Yes.
And channels tend to have their own bias. And the only thing that bothers me is if a channel with a bias pretends it's news. And CNN is no longer a news channel. MSNBC is no longer a news channel. Fox never pretended to be a news channel, even though it's called Fox News. And by the way, JBS, I say it all the time, we have an orientation. And you heard Benjamin describe it for the MirYam Institute. It is everybody's welcome on JBS, unless you're against the survival and well-being of the state of Israel. At that point, you've crossed the line. And just as you know, Benjamin has said, he leans conservative right of center. He wants people who are left, even hard left, to be represented in debates of the MirYam Institute, because the only way we really learn is by hearing, and again, I love the way you said it, two strong advocates in civil, respectful conversation and debate share their respective ideas, and the listener or the viewer or the attendee gets to learn. We don't have that. In the Jewish world, we don't have it. On American television, it's almost absent. You only hear people from one side. The MirYam Institute has a philosophy, which, by the way, dovetails with the JBS philosophy. But the MirYam has it in spades. And it's that there are very complicated, sensitive, challenging issues confronting Jewish life, the state of Israel, and there are good people on both sides.
Right.
Left and right. And I want to stress that, Benjamin. There are good, intelligent, but good people. Not one side is, righteous. There's not one side, is righteous, it's tzaddik, and the other side is Russia. The other side is wicked. No. You have people who see things differently, and then for the best motives, they believe their policies are the most efficacious. Okay, let's duke it out.
Correct.
In the arena of ideas, and that is what the MirYam Institute is doing. And again, I'll say it for the umpteenth time. I am so proud to be partnering with you, Benjamin.
So first of all, I want to tell everybody, and I'm not doing this with a sense to returning your kindness, but just to actually politely correct you. It's you who's been gracious to us. I spoke a lot about American Jewry and the kindness and benevolence and support of American Jewry. Well, I will never forget when you turned to me after you had me in there to sit for interview about the new state solution, and you said to me, as though it was Muvan me'alav, as though it was to be taken for granted, Benjamin, if ever you want a studio to speak, to interview, to dialogue with anybody, this is your studio. You tell me when you want it, and it's yours. And this is not the studio that I first came to in Fort Lee when you were over there. This is a studio more or less in Times Square that Mark Golub and JBS is offering to me lishma, just to undertake our work. And I will tell you that you used this phrase that I'm going to slightly refine. You said that people should consider investing in JBS. I don't think they should consider it. I think they should do it, right? You either do it or you don't do it. Consider is a very loose term. It speaks to a lack of decision. I want people to invest, and I'm using that word deliberately. I'm not asking for people to donate to it. It's an investment. It's an investment in this incredible archive. It's an investment in this font of knowledge on contemporary Jewish issues, as I said, from leading Jewish thinkers, from leading members of the Jewish community. As we see all of these subjects being discussed about the Jewish position on the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and whether we should apply sovereignty to the Jordan Valley, and whether we like Benjamin Netanyahu or not, you are giving a platform where people today can watch it, and their children and grandchildren will be able to know what was the subject and the discussion and the discourse at the time. And it needs to be viewed as something in which people should invest, because the dividends will be paid by way of enriching Jewish knowledge for generations to come. And I mean that sincerely. So there are just 2 points there that I want to speak about. It's you who's bestowed kindness upon us, Mark. And I said at the outset, I very much view you as a mentor, especially with our online work, and I will continue to do that. And it's the work that you're doing is so vital, so important. And yes, people absolutely should be investing in it. Because they will reap the rewards later on. You couldn't be more accurate in what you said about there not being any news anymore. But, you know, debate, and who knows better than you, the veracity of what I'm to say, debate and discussion, even without resolution, is an absolute bedrock tenet of what makes the Jewish people the Jewish people. An absolute bedrock tenet. And the idea that the Jewish people would allow discourse and discussion about the subject of the state of Israel, what I would say is the most central aspect of Jewish identity, along with the Torah itself, to be something that is eschewed and cast aside and drowned out, is really to act in violation of the most important and central principles of our faith. And so, yes, I'm on the right on security. As I said, I'm on the left on social issues, but I'm definitely on the right of security. I always have been. I've never changed my tune on that. But I am absolutely dedicated to bringing in these voices, and we're doing it. We're actually doing it. I'll give you an example. The subject of sovereignty in the Jordan Valley is a hot subject in Israel. Last week, we put out 2 opinion pieces in the mainstream media, one by a storied ambassador who is opposed to applying sovereignty in the Jordan Valley, and the other by his son, a very well and highly regarded, decorated general, brigadier general of the Israel Defense Forces, now retired, who is absolutely for the application of sovereignty. Are you going to tell me that either side is a traitor to the state of Israel because of their viewpoint? Are you going to tell me one is less of a patriot because of their viewpoints? They have given the best of their professional lives in the defense of Israel, one through the diplomatic means and one through the military means. I think they've earned the right to discuss, and I think that we all owe it to them to hear them. I'll give you one other very quick example. Yair Golan. Yair Golan is the immediate past Deputy Chief of Staff of the Israel Defense Forces. He joined politics, and he's now a member of the very far left within Israel's mainstream political spectrum. He belongs to the Meretz coalition, so he's left of Labour, and so on and so forth. That man is constantly being hounded with the allegation that he's a traitor to the cause of Israel. Have you ever heard anything so perverse and ridiculous as that? A man who has taken fire in the course of the defense of the state of Israel, whose children are members of elite units, who's now turned away jobs and opportunities in the private sector to again serve. This man is a great Israeli, a great Zionist. And you know what he told me his greatest trouble was? He said that secular Israelis have been very, very good at saying what their Judaism is not about, but they've failed to express, in his view, what their Judaism is for, how they manifest that, how they want to bring that into their daily lives. Now, these are his words. He said that, Mark, when I said to him, what would you like to lecture about? He didn't want to lecture about the northern border. He didn't want to lecture about being the deputy chief and stuff. He's moved by this issue about the Jewish future within secular Israeli society. And to the right of him is General Gershon HaKohen. General Gershon HaKohen is to the right of center, completely opposed to giving land. He's one of the most brilliant strategic minds in the state of Israel today, a former general. That individual was the individual tapped by Ariel Sharon to oversee the disengagement from the Gaza Strip. He undertook that duty not because he was a traitor to his cause, because he's a great Israeli, and only a religious general could bring about the bloodless disengagement, whether you agree with that or not. And for the record, I disagree with it, with the disengagement. Only he could do it in a way where a hand of a Jew was not raised against another Jew, where nobody's blood was spilled. He's a great patriot, he's a great Zionist, he's a great thinker, and he's still carrying on the fight for Israel's future. And both of these individuals write, opine, talk, lecture, debate, and teach at the MirYam Institute. And people can find that, and that's just one example.
Just fabulous. I want you to comment on something. A viewer sent me a very interesting email. And I often rail against the notion of narrative. The word narrative drives me crazy. Narrative is a story. And very often you'll hear whether, the Israeli has their narrative and the Palestinian has their narrative. And it's as if both are equal because they're both narratives. And I've argued that anybody's entitled to their story, their narrative, but there is historical fact. And that what you want is to reflect the facts as much as you can, and then understand how the facts informed events and drove events. And there is a difference between a narrative and historical fact. And I make the distinction between the Palestinian narrative and the fact, the entire corpus of facts that led to the establishment of the State of Israel. So this viewer writes me and says, you seem to accept the notion of Israel being the ancient homeland of the Jewish people. Eretz Yisrael is the homeland of the Jewish people, and that therefore the Jewish people have a right to it. But isn't the notion of a homeland, especially if it comes from God, isn't that just the Jewish narrative? And it's no different than the Palestinian narrative. And that you're not being fair when you act as if the Jewish claim to Eretz Yisrael, to the Zionist dream, is fact-based if you're arguing it's a Jewish homeland that goes back to the time it was given to the Jewish people by God. I want to know how you would answer that viewer were he to say to you, Benjamin, well, is there any more substance to the Jewish claim of an ancestral homeland than there is to the Islamic Palestinian claim? And if you are claiming it comes from God, which many Jews do, I do not, by the way. That's not my understanding of what a Jewish homeland is historically. But I want to hear how you would respond to somebody who would say to you, there is no distinction in narrative between the Jewish narrative, the Zionist narrative, and the Palestinian narrative.
Yeah, so first of all, this idea that all narratives are equal is demonstrably ridiculous, and I would argue even dangerous. You can have a situation whereby and I'm not drawing parallels between one regime and another regime, but Adolf Hitler had a narrative that blonde-haired, blue-eyed individuals were the way forward and the superior race and would prove themselves a superior race in every way, shape, and form. And then you had a complete destruction of the sports team in the Olympic Games. If you remember, it was shown to be a complete nonsense. The idea that they were on the side of right was disproven by way of the events of the Second World War. And they have a narrative, and they give a narrative, and they put forward their narrative, and then there's the truth. And the truth is that that narrative is a bad narrative. That narrative is a dangerous narrative, and that narrative is pernicious to humanity. So it's not just about giving credence to narratives because you have to listen to each and every narrative. You have to, as you're saying, draw a clear distinction between a narrative and truth. You say historical fact. I would add to that also contemporary truth as well, which I think you would agree with, Mark.
Absolutely.
I also want it to be very, very clear that the continuous presence of the Jewish people in the land of Israel is not something that ought to really be debated. It's something that ought to be acknowledged. The absence of the existence of a Palestinian state is also something that ought to be acknowledged, not just in the contemporary moment, but there's never been a state for the Palestinian Arabs throughout the annals of history. Now, with all of that having been said, and I actually, when I say this land is sworn unto our forefathers by God, I'm alluding to our belief as a people. In final analysis, that is what our people have coalesced around. And the reality of the matter is that I'm not here, and this is something that I learned through my lectures on university campuses, I'm not here to promote myself as an impartial discussant within this conversation. I want to be very, very clear about that. I have a side. I've picked that side has picked me, and not only has that side picked me, but my opponents have also picked me. They've also designated me as being an individual who speaks on behalf of the cause of Israel and Zionism and the Jewish people, and I proudly accept that mantle and that role. And as such, I'm going to continue to promote the Jewish people's narrative, the Jewish people's presence, the legitimacy of our presence, and my sincere hope that we will continue to build up our presence within the state of Israel. Opposite narratives be damned. Now, with all of that having been said, I'm a little bit of a strange bird because despite the fact that I think that the Jewish people's truth is the truth when it comes to our presence in the state of Israel, and despite the fact that I give short shrift to any argument of legitimate claims to Jerusalem or Judea and Samaria or Netanya or Haifa or anywhere else for a Palestinian people, I do say that a Palestinian Arab people has come about. It exists, they are there. My own view is that they're not to be ignored and they're not to be delegitimized. I'm not talking about their behavior. So for example, when you have Hamas operating in the most profane manner possible, that's to be delegitimized and in my view, even militarily opposed and militarily destroyed, incidentally. But if you're talking about the Palestinian Arabs, I'm not going to say to you that they don't exist. They have coalesced around a national narrative and around a national identity, and they have national yearnings. And I actually, despite my belonging to the right of center, I'm actually very, very dedicated to the establishment of a homeland for the Palestinian Arabs. That homeland has to live side by side with the state of Israel in security, as does the state of Israel. In my opinion, it must not come at the cost of the state of Israel. It must not in any way subtract from the security of the state of Israel or detract from the legitimacy or the situation of the state of Israel. And if we can think along those lines, and I believe we can bring about a situation where each peoplehood can build up a state in accordance with their own narratives and indeed their own truths going forward. That's what I would like to see. People can learn more about that if they'd like to. I've put that forward. I'm on the record for it. It's called the newstatesolution.org. It's on the Miriam Institute website. And I'm very dedicated to establishing this state in the Gaza and the Sinai for the Palestinian Arabs. But let me tell you something. The Palestinian Arabs who are in Judea and Samaria live alongside us, live with us, continue to engage with us, conduct commerce with us, be part of our society, be part of our story, as in many positive respects you already are. I can assure you that if you extend your hands in peace towards your Jewish neighbors, not only will your Jewish neighbors grasp that hand, but they will draw you close and they will hug you and they will embrace you, and they'll move on towards a conflict-ending reality for both peoples. And I think that's what we should focus on, not whether one's narrative is right or wrong, and certainly we should never subjugate truth for the sake of promoting narrative, which may very well, and I believe in this case, is absolutely false.
You know, I know our audience knows what I'm about to say, that I just adore you. I love you so much. I've loved you from the moment you first came into my life. I am so proud that I'm associated with you. I know you will continue to do just fabulous things with the MirYam Institute and anything else you decide to do. There is no voice like you in the Jewish world today. And that, in part, by the way, is why you've been so successful. Kol hakavod to you. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha to you. You should be safe and stay well, you and everybody you love, during this ludicrous coronavirus. And you and I, we will stay together as long as we're both involved in this Jewish journey, which I hope goes on for years and years and years. Thank you so very much, Benjamin.
Mark, may I just respond very briefly? I'm so very taken by your words, and I just want to say a couple of very, very short messages. First of all, my reiterated thanks to you. None of this would happen without you and your team driving it forward, and I do hope that people will give you the means of continuing that and moving from strength to strength. It's so very important. I also want to thank my board. They know who they are. I want to thank them for bringing their different views and their good counsel and advice and savvy and continuing my education. Each and every one of them is dear to me, and I don't take them for granted for a moment. I want to thank the members of American Jury, and I want to tell you that, as I said, we are facing a difficult time right now. But the state of Israel and the United States of America are both great, great countries. Now, in my opinion, they're great countries because each of them respectively are homes to a great, great people. And whether you're watching this from Israel or you're watching this from the United States of America, you are a great people. I don't want you to be ashamed or to let world opinion or even internal disputes cause you to question that. So I'm asking you, please, as you go forward from this point onwards, yes, we're facing adversity, but it's not come to stay, and it absolutely will pass, and we will emerge from it stronger than ever. Do so with your shoulders rolled back, your spines stiffened. Raise your heads up high and be proud of the places that you have the privilege of being citizens within and the ability to improve through your civic action and endeavor and the democratic system. Please, they say in the Israel Defense Forces, the heaviest piece of equipment is not the gun, it's not the mortars, it's not even the tank. It's a head bowed to adversity, because not even 100 men can raise that up again. You must raise your heads. Now is the time to do so. Walk tall, and remember, whether you're speaking about Israel or America, the great countries, bo nishmor alein, ubezrat Hashem, and gam tishmeru aleinu. Let's guard over these two countries. With God's help, they'll guard over us, as ever they have, as ever they do, and as ever they will, and we will yet move to far, far brighter days, peace, tranquility, success, and vibrance. Kadima. onwards together. Thank you so very much, Mark, and thank you to everybody who's given me the opportunity to reach them today.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. The thoughts and insights of a very special Jew, person, Israeli Jew, Benjamin Anthony, who's now the founding CEO of a wonderful organization I hope you'll all get to know really well, the MirYam Institute. You can find them online at MirYam Institute, one word, MirYaminstitute.org. And I do hope you've enjoyed spending time learning from Benjamin Anthony, as I always do. Of course, as always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me at rabbigolub@jbstv.org. Or you can write me at our new Stamford, Connecticut address, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut, 06904. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And remember, you can now download the L'Chaim podcast and listen to the L'Chaim programs on your phone, your iPad, your computer. Take L'Chaim with you wherever you go. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.